Good morning. My name is Donald McEachin, and I have the privilege of representing Virginia's 4th Congressional District and serving on this committee, the Natural Resources Committee, along with Chairman Raul Grijalva. He will be along shortly, and he will be joining us and sharing his remarks. Raul and I have committed to our Environmental Justice for All Act and the process, which is the important part, to craft this comprehensive legislation. Since the last Congress, I cannot tell you how excited I am to officially be here and to finally introduce it. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Angelo with the Moving Forward Network, Taysha with the Alliance for Appalachia, Juan with the Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, and Kim with Clean Water Action of New Jersey for traveling all the way across the country to help us introduce our bill. We would not be here today without you and our other partners in the Environmental Justice Working Group. I've said this before and I will say it again. I am truly inspired by your commitment to equity and justice, and I am honored, deeply honored, to fight alongside with you. I also want to thank my chairman, Mr. Grijalva, for his leadership and friendship. This legislation builds on work that Raul has championed for years, and I am so grateful to be working with him to extend the promise of environmental justice to all. Our Environmental Justice for All Act was crafted by the people and for the people. As we know, for far too long, communities of color, low-income communities, and tribal and indigenous communities have not had a meaningful voice in the decision-making process impacting their well-being. Not with this bill. Since the last Congress, Raul and I have been collaborating with environmental justice leaders and community members on an inclusive, participatory process to craft the bill we are introducing today. We spent the last year and a half listening and learning about the impacts of national policies and climate change on communities across the country and building a community-led, community-driven process to address the needs and perspectives of environmental justice communities. Our bill is the product of countless hours of input and months of open comment, and we incorporated hundreds of suggestions from environmental justice advocates into the final bill. Included in our legislation is the following: language to strengthen the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to ensure that citizens can enforce their rights against environmental injustices, robust support for research, community education, and technical assistance to help environmental justice, health, equity, and civil rights organizations build capacity. The requirement for federal agencies to provide early and meaningful community involvement opportunities under NEPA when proposing an action affecting an environmental justice community. An end to the practice of overburdening environmental justice communities with the cumulative impacts and over-concentration of pollution sources in their communities. Mechanisms to aid fossil fuel-dependent communities in achieving a just and equitable transition to clean energy. And more provisions that recognize the rights of all people to pure air, clean water, and all the richness and wonder that nature can provide. In practice, the Environmental Justice for All Act addresses environmental injustices by empowering those who are disproportionately affected by environmental injustice to fiercely participate in the planning process from which they have long been excluded. The Environmental Justice for All Act demands stringent environmental compliance that protects all communities from pollution. And the Environmental Justice for All Act ensures that our society becomes healthy and sustainable, not just for the privileged few, but for everyone. I am honored to have worked with Chairman Grijalva, our Environmental Justice Working Group members, and allies across the country to introduce this foundation legislation that ensures that all people live, work, play, and learn in spaces that are safe and healthy. But our work is not done. We cannot continue to move our nation closer to a fairer, more just society that everyone is determined to build. Our future and the future of our children and our grandchildren depend on it. I thank you, and I introduce to you the genius behind all of this, our chairman, Raul Grijalva.
I don't know about genius.
Stable genius.
I'm glad you didn't say stable genius. You know, that would have thrown the whole event off. Mr. McEachin outlined the effort and the appropriate thanks to organizations, individuals, which we received many comments, recommendations, critiques of the legislation as we went forward. And these 18 months have been really productive in formulating this bill, dealing primarily with affected communities and having them be the drivers to much of the content that is within this legislation. I think that's what gives it its strength. I think that's what gives it legitimacy and gives it its authenticity, that it is a real bill representing the real needs of Americans in this country. The discussion about environment, the discussion about climate change, the afterthought in all of those discussions has always been, what do we do with those communities? The vulnerable communities. The communities that have been the champions of environmental justice in this country. What do we do with them? How do we incorporate them? What do we carve out? How do we add them to that? What we wanted to do with this piece of legislation, and I'm very grateful, is interject this discussion into the center of the overall discussion about climate change and environmental policy going forward. That we're all in this together, that there should not be have-nots and haves as we go forward in dealing with the needs of resilience, adaptation, and change with regard to the climate crisis, and that people shouldn't be left behind. One of every community and the speakers that'll follow me are going to talk about the importance, and communities of color and poor communities. It is no accident that one of the first executive orders that Trump wrote and ended was the health impact study of mountaintop removal with regard to coal mining and the health effects and the devastation that is caused to those families. No coincidence. It's no coincidence that the drivers of environmental policy right now are big gas and big oil. No coincidence. And this bill creates some balance for normal folk in this country. And it says we're here too. We want to be part of the policy, and we want to protect our communities, and we want to grow and develop our communities. I'm very proud of this piece of work. Mr. McEachin and I, when this started, felt that there was going to be a light at the end of it. The reason for my pride in this is that the work that was done on this bill represents, I believe, the legitimate interest of environmental justice communities across this country. 2014, 2015, I wrote the perfect environmental justice bill. And I submitted it. And I'm wondering, why aren't people buying into this wonderful idea? Through part arrogance and part ignorance, the consultation, the discussion, the equity that should have been extended to those communities was not. This is different. The roles were reversed, and Mr. McEachin's leadership and his spirituality in bringing this about has been very important. We're also, so I'm proud. I think we're going to file it. We're going to then begin the process of getting members to join us. We have original co-sponsors, two of which are here today, and going a little bit out of sequence because they are here today. Ask them for a few brief comments. Representative Kennedy from Massachusetts is with us and an original co-sponsor, and of course, my dear friend from California, Mr. Lowenthal, whose staff also contributed greatly to this bill. I want to thank the staffs, Mr. Matthew, Chris, and their teams, Laura and their teams, Mr. McEachin's personal staff and his office staff, which was tremendous, Mr. Lowenthal's staff, Mr. Kennedy's staff, that all contributed greatly to this bill and put some sweat equity into this discussion. I would be remiss not to thank them because we get to stand up here and talk nice about what we just did. We didn't do it. It was a process, and it was a group process, and none of us can take singular credit. This is a shared credit, and now, to moving this bill forward, it becomes a shared responsibility of every one of us. So with that, let me invite Chairman of the Subcommittee, Natural Resources, good friend from California, Mr. Lowenthal, and he will introduce for a couple of comments, and then after that, my good friend from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Lowenthal?
Well, I'm Congressman Lowenthal, and I'm on the Natural Resources Committee, and I'm proud to be here with my chair, Mr. McEachin, for their great leadership on this. You know, what we're talking about is making sure that we don't forget about and we really protect frontline communities. That's really what we're all about, that everybody has an equal opportunity to protect themselves and to support themselves. And what we've done before is we've had legislation out there, but we do a good job of protecting some communities, but we leave out entire communities, and that's what this is all about. The era of leaving out communities is over, and so I'm just really glad to be here. Thank you.
I will be very brief, everybody. A couple of things, though, first. I've now been in Congress I'm in my fourth term. I came in with Mr. Lowenthal. I can count on one hand the number of times at the introduction of a major bill, the chairman of the committee did not claim credit for him himself and actually said this was a process by which we tried to open it up and get as much input as we possibly could from the communities that were affected, the communities that have been left behind far too many times over the course of our nation's history. As you all know, that just doesn't happen, but it just did. Chairman, well done. Congratulations. Mr. McEachin obviously was a central part of that effort. I salute him and his team and the extraordinary activists and advocates that were the central piece to building this legislation out. Despite every reason and despite all of our past history and every opportunity for an excuse, never lost faith in this process, and we are where we are today because of their perseverance, their patience, their tenacity, and their advocacy. So congratulations to each and every one of you. Go for it, absolutely. Because while, yes, this bill is about a decades-long delay in environmental justice, it's about centering voices that have been far too often cast out to the margins, are not brought to the table on pieces of major policy. It is also about, from my perspective, a landmark way in which Congress needs to operate going forward. If we look at the major episodes of legislative action over the course of our history, the major bills that have defined society to this day, you look back at a New Deal, and you look at who was left out of it. Agricultural workers, domestic workers. You look at a Fair Housing Act, and who was left out of it? African Americans in structural racism, the red line. You look at a GI Bill, and who was left out? African American veterans. We look at a crime bill, and who did it target? And what was the result? A generation of mass incarceration. We look at these major areas or major focal points in our history, and they can be defined not just by who was at the table, but by who was deliberately left out. And what is today about? It's about making sure that those voices, those that have borne the brunt of these policy choices, affirmative choices by a federal government to leave them out, that they've been brought in to the center of this discussion. Again, I salute the chairman for his extraordinary advocacy and leadership to do so, for challenging this body and turning it on its head and coming up with an extraordinary work product, which we should be able to celebrate and push forward for generations to come. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the government.
It is now my pleasure to introduce an invaluable member of our Environmental Justice Working Group and one of the moderators of our first of its kind congressional convening on Environmental Justice, Angelo Logan, the Campaign Director of the Moving Forward Network.
Thank you. Again, my name is Angelo Logan, and on behalf of the Moving Forward Network, a network of 50 organizations across the country led by frontline communities, we want to applaud Chairman Grijalva, Representative McEachin, members of the committee. Thank you. I want to applaud you for both addressing environmental justice, but also engaging frontline communities in the development of your agenda, of this policy, of this effort. It wasn't easy. It was a long process. It was a lot of work, but I believe it made this effort stronger. And I believe that it's going to achieve major goals in advancing environmental justice. As you all know, for way too long, communities of color, working class, working poor communities of color have been attacked by environmental degradation, have been under assault of environmental attacks. Just Tuesday, back home in my community in Long Beach and Los Angeles, the Marathon oil refinery had a major explosion and fire. This is one example of an extractive industry going unchecked and underregulated. For too long, this has happened in our communities, whether it's in Houston, in New Jersey, in Seattle, in Los Angeles, in Long Beach. The list goes on and on. For too long, this has been happening, unaddressed. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is attempting to roll back a foundational policy, a foundational law, the National Environmental Policy Act, an act that lends voice to communities so they can help to self-determine their communities, to make sure their communities are safer than if NEPA was not in place. But with the leadership of Chairman Grijalva and Representative McEachin, led by and guided by the Environmental Justice Working Group out of the House Committee on Natural Resources, environmental racism will not be ignored. It will not be avoided. On the contrary, through the Environmental Justice for All Act, we will have the ability and the right, and governmental agencies will be required to engage communities in a real, meaningful way, to make sure that communities have a seat at the table, making sure communities have the ability to determine for themselves their communities, to make sure that we are not and continue to be under attack. Environmental justice is now under attack. We will stop environmental justice. We will work towards environmental justice now. We're looking forward to working with the chairman, the representatives, and the members of the committee to advance and protect environmental justice. This is going to be a process, and we have accepted the invitation to participate in it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ha Moraiweka, na Sainamana Tesha Devon. Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I am here today in support of the Environmental Justice for All Act. There are a great number of things that I could say about this act, but today I'm going to talk about just a few. First, I do want to talk about the process. The process in which this bill was informed has truly incorporated our environmental justice communities. Not only do we have this working group that includes organizations already dedicated to environmental justice, but we also had 2 rounds of public comments and input with very intentional outreach. The edits and revisions made during this process showed us that our experience was taken seriously. This is something that we don't see quite often, and being from a small town in far southwest Virginia, I was able to participate in this process through the Alliance. We appreciate the intentional inclusion that allows us and the people that are impacted to have a true voice in the solutions that are being presented on our behalf. Second, I would like to highlight the just transition aspect of our work. The last time I was here, I spoke to you all about mountaintop removal and the impacts it has in our region. Health-wise, we are dealing with a black lung epidemic, cardiovascular diseases, among others. Mountaintop removal buries our waterways, our watersheds, poisons our drinking water, devastates our vital ecosystems. Financially, we are seeing coal companies go bankrupt and pushing the cost of reclamation and healthcare back onto the communities that are already struggling. We can address these issues through the lens of a just transition. A fair and just transition to a clean energy economy should mean a few things. It means that we're collectively and consciously making our decision to move forward. It means we are taking care of those most vulnerable, we're taking care of those impacted, and we're taking care of the ecosystems in our environmental justice communities, while also doing what is best for the public at large. It means impacted communities are part of the process and part of these conversations providing solutions. We all have the right to clean air, water, and lives free of exposure to dangerous toxins. However, we as environmental justice communities should not, I repeat, should not be expected to shoulder the burden of a transition into a clean economy. This bill takes that principle a step further to ensure that we use this just transition framework throughout all of our environmental solutions. By establishing the Federal Energy Transition Economic Development Assistance Fund that is in this bill, we will use new revenues from fees on oil, gas, and coal industries to support communities and workers as they transition away from our extractive-based economy. This bill has provisions that give our communities access to the resources and benefits of a sustainable future. The Environmental Justice for All Act is truly what we would like to call people's bill, and we would like to thank the Representative McEachin and the Chairman Grijalva for all your leadership.
Good morning. My name is Juan Parras, Director of Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, located in Houston, Texas. I am here today grateful and appreciative of Congressman Grijalva and Representative McEachin for having the fortitude to invite and encourage environmental justice grassroots organizations to participate in the drafting of this House bill on environmental justice for all. We thank you for that, Congressman, and all of your activity in this program. It's taken 26 years, actually, for a bill to be introduced to really address the problems by Executive Order 869, okay? I hope I got it right. But anyway, it's taken 26 years. The executive order was done by President Clinton, and while it had good intentions, it really lacked a lot of teeth behind it. And one of the pictures that we have to address this is this poster that we have in the back. It says, in the belly of the beast, it's got the EPA with their hands over its mouth, basically to us symbolizing that when we address environmental issues to the EPA, they don't want to talk about it. And then they make all sorts of excuses as to why you cannot get help. So that represents the EPA. And then we have our state commission, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, with their hands over their eyes. And you see all that industry that impacts us in the Houston and frontline communities. But we have depicting the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality with closing their eyes because they don't want to see the real impact of the refineries and petrochemical plants in our communities and how close they are to communities. And then we have the Department of Homeland Security basically putting their hands on their ears, symbolizing that, there's serious threats due to, even the chemical security policy and the risk management plan that this administration has done away with. We face daily threats, not only by, potential serious incidents like you have seen lately in the past year, numerous incidents in Houston, Texas. So we face those issues, and we hope that I can go back home and put this poster in my attic and come up with a new one that says Environmental for All has passed, this House bill has passed, and then we really serve the needs of environmental justice communities who are not invisible communities. They exist, and they need to be helped. Just like anything else, we are making a difference, you are making a difference, and we appreciate everyone here for your presence and in insisting and pushing for environmental justice for all, because it's the only right thing to do as a nation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. We've been joined by a gentleman who's been working in the environmental justice area for decades, really working hard in the vineyards, and I'd like to yield just for a moment because he's on a tight time schedule, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. I am very, very enthused to be here this morning with, of course, all of the advocates who have worked with the principal sponsors over a long period of time to ensure that impacted communities who are fighting against environmental racism and for environmental justice have a seat at a table, and their voices and their ideas are incorporated into a comprehensive package that will ensure that there will be environmental justice for all of our people across the country. I am delighted to be one of the new members of the Natural Resources Committee, and someone whose district in Chicago and suburban Cook County encompasses many communities that historically have been dumped on. These are areas in the old industrial city where many of the polluting industries have been located for many years. This is the type of relief, the type of vehicle that we need to ensure that there is environmental justice. The environmental groups in my district and beyond will be very pleased to see this type of legislation working its way to ensure that we achieve environmental justice and sustainability and save Mother Earth in time for our children, grandchildren, and the generations to come. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Kim Gaddy. I'm the Environmental Justice Organizer for Clean Water Action of New Jersey. I am a fourth-generation Norker, and I truly want to thank Chairman Grijalva and Representative McEachin for all the work that they have done. As an environmental justice organizer, we always say we need to sit at the table and we have to speak for ourselves. And they have included us in that process, and I'm truly, truly appreciative for that. What is also important about this is that these representatives are fighting the good fight. They're making sure that just because we come from a certain zip code, that our lives are not jeopardized any longer. And that is important, because our zip code should not define the health. I'm a mother of 3 children who are asthmatic, and it's because I chose to stay in Newark with my parents and my community. And now each and every day, I have to witness the health of my kids declining from the cumulative impacts and pollution that we suffer from each and every day. We live in communities that are under attack, and just because of the color of our skin and a socioeconomic background, this is what we have to bear. We cannot escape the pollution sources that exist. Communities of color and low-income communities urgently need policies to be developed and implemented that will address cumulative impacts. As a resident of Newark, as I stated, my family, along with so many thousands of residents, are daily exposed to disproportionate high levels of diesel pollutants from thousands of trucks. We live in the backyard of the 3rd largest port. 20,000 trucks come in and out that port on a daily basis, and 5,000 of those trucks stay on our local roads spewing diesel emission, which is a known carcinogen into our communities. High levels of the toxins each and every day. We have other toxic facilities. We have the largest incinerator in the city of Newark in the Northeast, taking garbage from New York and all of New Jersey and all over the world, which again increases the amount of toxins. And so this is why cumulative impacts is so important. We have toxic flooding in our communities that we can't escape from. Senior citizens, when it rains, have to begin to navigate their way through the streets because the flooding is covering in our community. We have children, when it rains and floods, you see them out there playing in this water, not understanding the toxicity that exists in these levels. The Environmental Justice Bill for All will address the cumulative impacts of state permitting decisions and bring much needed relief to our communities and all overburdened communities across the country. Moreover, this bill will strengthen the work for Newark residents and members who spearheaded the first environmental justice and cumulative impact ordinance in the country in 2016. This gives us the leverage that we need to continue to keep the pressure on our local government and our state government, because now they can see what is happening nationally. And so that's why this is crucial for us. The Clean Water Act's primary objective is to restore and maintain the integrity of the nation's waters. This bill will protect our water quality levels and defend the Clean Water Act. As you know, the Trump administration is rolling back all of these protections. And we can't afford to not have quality, safe, affordable drinking water and water that is swimmable for our communities. Lastly, considering the cumulative impacts will protect water pollution and protect overburdening water sources. So again, I thank you for the work. Keep on keeping on. God bless.
We've been joined by another member who has been working in the environmental justice area for years. She is my classmate, elected with me in 2016, took office in 2017, the gentle lady from Compton, Nanette Barragán.
Are we ready for climate justice now? Yeah. I am so excited to be here today to have this conversation and to make sure we're highlighting the importance of this legislation and this bill. Our frontline communities and communities of color are often left behind. Our low-income communities, we're hit first and we're hit worst. And that's why this legislation and this work and this coalition is so critically important. And at a time when we are in the majority, it is time for us to move and to act. We cannot be ignored anymore and need to be at the forefront of this conversation. So I am so excited today. I want to thank you all for your work, for my colleagues for moving this forward. I am honored to be part of this movement. Let's keep it going because climate change is happening. We need the action now. We need it bold, and the communities of color need to be part of that conversation. Thank you.
I think,
Mr. Chairman?
thank you. Mr. McEachin, thank you, and to my colleagues. We're, all the folks that are up here are open for any questions, discussions, chats. And I want to thank everyone for being here today, and my profound thanks to all the organizations and the individuals that helped us all along the way to put a piece of legislation together that not only is it revolutionary in the sense that the source of the ideas came from a real community, but also that it is a piece of legislation that I hope throughout this Congress, my colleagues across the board could get behind, move it as quickly as possible, and I think have an important vote on the House floor that says this is the position of this majority and this is a position that we want to present to the country. That's the goal. That's the effort. And like I said, that shared effort and shared responsibility goes forward. And with the leadership of Mr. McEachin and the colleagues that spoke today, and as well as the organizations and individuals that are here today, that is not only doable, it is potentially going to be one of the most significant actions that we take in this Congress this year. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. And we're open for questions individually, collectively, but thank you a lot. Appreciate it.
Yes.
No questions? All clear as mud? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you so much for this. My name's Lorelei Kelly. I'm leading a project at Georgetown on new technology methods for land pollution, and I'm going to be doing a case study on all of this.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
The question I have for the participants, the citizens, is in what way was this different that you felt you had a real voice? And for the members and staff, because staff are so compressed already, there's so much on the agenda, and there's so little bandwidth really to deal with lots more participation. How did you do that on your staff?
Our staff has a lot of time.
I was still staff for 10 years,
It's a fountain of time there.
How'd you do that?
Well, you know, because of the kind of the specificity that you're asking for, why don't some of the organizations can talk to you about how their reaction to the process, and certainly the staff's going to be available here. But I mean, this could be a long-winded question that gets more into a process that I can't answer you in 30 seconds or less. Okay, so,
That's all follow.
okay, so, all right, thank you.
I would just say that right next door to the Congressman's great state of Arizona, in 1996, the James Principles for Democratic Organizing were brought to the world by frontline communities and communities of color. They just followed that. The blueprint has been there for many years, so that's the simple answer.
And I will add to that when we were doing this process, we did have media that we were going through. So there was this POPVOX and things that we had talked about doing, but other communities that maybe didn't have internet access, we were able to go around it in other ways. Letterheads, it was very intentional. The staff called us to make sure what we were doing, it was very inclusive.
There's also opportunity for us as organizations to come together and work together on a shared goal and a shared agenda. So we also self-organize ourselves with the impetus of the chairman and the representatives bringing us together, not just over the phone, over the internet, and over video calls, but also during the environmental justice convening that happened here in Congress, which was exceptional.
And Yvette from Tejas with Texas Environmental Justice. This was an opportunity for us as community-based organizations to really engage with our community in a way where they didn't need us to play that center role and advocate on their behalf, but where people in the community could advocate on their own behalf. So we had students, students who obviously have a school schedule, they were able to take a little bit of time during their government classes to engage in a process actively while they're learning about it simultaneously. So this process opened up doors where otherwise it would be closed-door conversations.
And just on a final note, what was so crucial and important is that we was invited early.
Yes.
We was not an afterthought.
That's right.
They brought us in early when we really was not comfortable with some of the statements. They said, well, what is it? What do we need to do? They opened up the comment period so that we could type in real time and have the input from everybody from our coalition. So that's important because that gave us our voices to really be heard. And so that's why this bill is the real deal.
From a member's, go ahead, please.
I'd like to add that when we talk about environmental justice impacted by whatever the issue is, it takes a long time to even connect with those grassroots organizations. And thanks to you, Congressman, that you made that possible, where we started to extend our reach and connect with other communities that are facing similar problems. Because as they say with the union, there's strength in numbers, right? And that's what we have to do, but we also have to have support at the top. So thank you for that again.
From a member perspective, I would just say that it's all a matter of prioritization. Just like Mr. Grijalva, when I ran for office, I emphasized the importance of the environment. In fact, I've always said that the environment is the most important issue of the 21st century, one that we have to get exactly right. So, I have a crackerjack staff led by Corey Solo.
Yes.
And on the legislative side, who's done wonderful work in this area. And we just rolled up our sleeves and prioritized it. And with the help of these folks and the chairman, we got hopefully a good product out.
I'd just like to add one last thing is that we're talking about the process from the ground up, but we're not done, right? This is going to continue on as a process, and we're going to continue to work the leadership on this to make sure that it gets past the finish line. And so we're really eager and really excited about continuing to work together to make this the best process possible and the best outcome possible.
Yes, sir.
Especially when other public input processes like NEPA are under attack. It's important for us to maintain open windows and doors in other ways, working with representatives and other Congress people on bills just like this.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Zach Coleman with Politico. Just a process question here. What committees of jurisdiction does this all have to go through? Have you spoken to the chairman? And then, after that, there's some things crafting a bill is one thing. Passing it is another. You want to obviously take your best shot and get what you want through, but there's some things on here that seem tough to pass in a Republican-controlled Senate, and certainly without a much larger majority for Democrats in the Senate. So what are your thoughts on actually getting this passed through a Republican-controlled Senate?
My colleague just said that that the process continues. I think the process of of advocacy for the legislation now gets strategized and committed to as we speak. Second, Democrats have a majority in the House, and the issue always about the issue always shifts to the abyss, the Senate. What happens or doesn't happen over there? Well, I think that as Mr. McEachin and I discussed this, our responsibility as members of Congress is to get it through this House. And that's priority number one. What the Senate does or doesn't do becomes another question for them. But let me tell you, I think it's going to be very difficult for people to turn their back on this issue when historically that back has been turned forever. And politically, I think the timing is such that if real engagement and real real voter engagement in this country is going to happen, then let's not exclude anybody. And I think this has a great deal of appeal. It has a great deal of support, and I think senators, Republican, are going to be very, very conscious of that. So, but our job first is getting it through the House, and I think that would be a victory, because I think what I think is important is that we set a template for the American people, all Americans. And this environmental justice legislation is a template that says this is an alternative to doing nothing, and this is an alternative to what Trump and his administration is doing. And I think that is a very powerful message in these times.
Let me also add that you asked what committee it goes to. It goes to Mr. Grijalva's committee. So yes, he's been spoken to about this.
Every single element of this bill would go through House Natural Resources Committee?
Well, the nexus for us is what was pointed out today, NEPA. And we feel I know Mr. Pallone, Chairman Pallone is aware of that, and members of that committee are very, very supportive and engaged in this as well. And certainly if it ends up with a dual referral, the same point that I made earlier about the Senate, I think it behooves all committees, certainly ours knows that, the Resources Committee, but it behooves all committees to be aware of the level of support and importance that this bill carries.
And if parts of it go to ENC, I have the privilege of serving there too, so I'll keep an eye out for it.
Well, and we have, it's well covered there.
But I think the difference is that we have people power with us. One of the reasons we wanted to make sure this was an inclusive process was not just for grins, but also to make sure that we had people buying in who would help us pass the bill.
That's right.
If you looked at just raw partisan numbers, the Affordable Care Act would be gone. And yes, the late John McCain gets credit for casting the right vote, but that vote was motivated in large part, all those people who supported the Affordable Care Act, those votes were motivated in large part by people calling in saying they want their health care, they want to fight against pre-existing conditions, they want to preserve that insurance for pre-existing conditions. In a similar vein, what you're going to see from these folks in their constituencies is a similar push to push this through not only the House but through the Senate. So I'm very optimistic. It is true that I'm the eternal optimist, but I have very good reasons to be optimistic.
I would just add that the difference, or one of the things that distinguishes these amazing frontline groups from standard green groups is that we don't bifurcate policy and organizing, we synergize it. And these are the best organizers. These are the best organizers in the country. We didn't get into this work for accolades or for goals. Our communities were under attack. And so having that drive alone is going to keep us going.
I would like to add that a lot of the work that we do, I probably would not have gotten started in this if it had not been for my wife. She got me in the environmental justice.
Yes, ma'am. Last question.
I'm just wondering when this bill will be introduced.
Today.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say
I got a kind of policy question. One of the ideas in here would be to establish some new fees on fossil fuels to create this economic transition fund. Chairman Grijalva also has a bill that would raise the royalty rates for extraction on public lands. And one of the concerns you sometimes hear from progressives is that that amounts to a pair of handcuffs. You're tying yourself to that revenue in order to fund these, that you're tying yourself to that local extraction in order to fund these programs. So the question is, how do you sort of avoid getting tied to that program, getting tied to the fees that extraction?
The self-fulfilling prophecy question, right? That in order to fund that the use and the extraction of fossil fuels has to increase in order to keep the funds running. And you'll notice even in the net zero one, impacted communities was a part of that, and specifically so that we wouldn't have the question of where is this going to go. As we transition, okay, away from fossil fuels to renewables and alternatives, during that transition, the fees generated are going to help with that transition. As that transition occurs and the revenue from those fees begins to decrease, I think that the programs and the policies that we're talking about, and this is McEachin optimism, will have the maturity and the support nationwide that will become more and more of a governmental responsibility and less of a fee responsibility.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Thank you.